Welcome back. It's me. So I was watching a interesting show about American history from the Smithsonian Museum, and this was just on, I think, Pluto TV or something. Just one of those, constantly rolling forward TV syndication platforms. And they were talking about the Great Depression and FDR's New Deal and all kinds of things that the government did to help make America great, and really investing in people and helping after the war, getting people educated, housing booms. I feel like what we see collectively as the American dream was born during the FDR administration. And I definitely want to touch on that in a little bit, probably another podcast episode. It won't be in this one. But I wanted to share the story of a woman who was in my life. She was someone I was aware of, I was acquainted with. She wasn't a friend. I don't think you could ask her about me and she wouldn't know me. I was just a kid at an elementary school where she worked. But it made me remember the story that she told to us in my 5th grade class. And I decided to do a Google search on her, and I found her obituary. And her obituary confirmed a lot of the information that I remember her sharing when I was a kid. This was 25 years ago, back in 2000. And I feel like it'd be good for you to know about the lady that we referred to as Miss Koyama. So her name is Midori Koyama, Midori. She was alive in the state of Idaho, Nampa, Idaho, from December 27th, 1930 through June 12th, 2011. Midori was born in Torrance, California on December 27th, 1930 to, I'm going to try to say this name, but I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce it. Let me know if you have a recommendation on how to say this. But the name is Masaichiro Marumoto. And then I think that was the dad. The mom, I believe his name is Asako Okuda. So Midori was raised in Southern California until age 11, at which time her family moved to Utah as part of the voluntary evacuation, quote, option of Executive Order 9066 during World War II. After moving to Utah, stupid computer notifications. After moving to Utah, she attended schools in Clearfield and Layton, Utah area, graduated from Davis High School in Ogden, Utah in 1950, and she attended Weber State College and worked at Hill Air Force Base. Turn that off. Midori's father was a judo instructor in the Ogden area. At her father's judo dojo annual tournament in 1960, she saw George Koyama, a judo instructor from Nampa, eating lunch. She grabbed a teapot from her mother's hand and walked over to serve him tea, and the rest, they say, is history. They were married in 1962, at which time Midori moved to Nampa, where she and George set up their home and started a family. One of Midori's passions was supporting education and working with children. She began working for the Nampa School District in 1970 and worked at Lincoln, Kenwood, and Centennial Elementary Schools. Midori was part of the inaugural staff of Centennial Elementary School when it opened in 1976, and she worked there until her retirement in 2004. She served as the instructional aide and librarian during her 28-year career at Centennial. At one point, as librarian at Centennial, she got the idea of selling pencils and origami cranes to raise money to buy books for the library. The idea was so successful, she continued to expand her product line. Kids at the school would give up their coins and make purchases at Mrs. Koyama's school store every week. While no official tally exists, she raised thousands of dollars that were used to purchase books for the library. Because of that work and her dedication, a section of Centennial School Library was dedicated in 1995 as Mrs. Koyama's Book Garden, an honor in which she took great pride. She volunteered at Centennial after retirement and continued to raise money for the school through her store. Another passion of Midori's was sharing and educating others about Japanese culture and the experiences of Japanese Americans during World War II. Before leaving California, Midori's father, in fear of retribution and racism, piled many of the family's Japanese possessions in a heap to be burned. Midori secretly pulled a favorite storybook of historic Japanese heroes and hid it inside her belongings and took it to Utah unbeknownst to anyone in the family. Perhaps spurred by that other similar childhood experiences, she wanted to pass along her culture and experiences to future generations. For many summers, she held Japanese language classes for the local area children. She also presented information to many school classes about her World War II relocation experience. Midori passed away due to a brief sudden illness on Sunday, June 12, 2011. She is survived by her husband, George. I think I found George's obituary. He died about 4 years later, it looks like. She is also survived by her son, John, daughter-in-law, Joyce, and their three grandchildren, Christina, Jackie, and Mason Koyama, all from Sacramento, California. Her surviving brother and sisters are Hiroki Marumoto of Layton, Utah, and Yukari Vicky McHessel of Belmont, California. Bill Marumoto of Westminster, California, and Seiko Kikuta of Eugene, Oregon. She was preceded in death by her parents. So that is the obituary of Midori Koyama. So she came into our classes and taught about being relocated involuntarily by the United States government from California to Utah, and that they were forced to sell their businesses, their homes, really kind of an over the night type thing. Like, you got to go get as much cash as you can out of what you've got, but they were forced to basically just abandon family heirlooms, their entire heritage, things that they brought with them from Japan, because there was this secret fear that all Japanese Americans were like sleeping agents and would be activated by the Emperor of Japan and stand with the former motherland and fight against the country. So the country hastily built these concentration camps. One is in Minidoka, Idaho. One was in Layton, Utah, which is where Midori went. And then was watching this show, and they said they were as far east as Arkansas. But the western U.S. was dotted with these concentration camps. And my next episode is going to be about that whole experience, and Minidoka in particular, which is a preserved historical site. These things were so cheaply built. You know, when you think about building a house, you build the frame, then you put the outer clad on, the tar paper, that black stuff. And then typically you put your siding on, insulate it, whatnot. They just stopped there. And I remember she was describing these places as being very cold and drafty, and they were there for, I think, 3 years. And what struck me when I was watching this Smithsonian thing was that they said they were officially free to leave, but due to the public opinion, they weren't allowed to go to any schools outside of the concentration camp. They weren't allowed to return back to their California homes or wherever they lived along the West Coast. Excuse me, I had to clear my throat, and I decided you wouldn't want to hear that. But they weren't allowed to go back to where they came from before they went to this concentration camp. And obviously they had no wealth. These guys had businesses that they just had to abandon. They were, however long they had been in the country, their existence was just wiped from their community. And they kind of had to rebuild wherever they could right outside of where they were put. So her story from California, some of the family went back to California, but she ended up having to rebuild probably with her parents right there in Utah, and then met somebody and went up to Nampa. And similar stories, people, went up to Minidoka. They, that's how we had more Japanese populations in places like Idaho because of these relocation efforts by our government during the FDR administration. Definitely a black eye in our country's history and FDR's administration, Democratic Party at the time. Frankly, for all politics in our country. But I remember Miss Koyama talking about this, and as you heard in that story from her obituary, she kept the book. And so education was very big to her, very important to her. And I remember the library was like my favorite place at Centennial Elementary School. I only went there for half of my elementary school years. Started school in another place of Idaho when we were kindergarten and whatnot. And I remember the school store is nothing more than just like a outdoor shed that they put in the hallway kind of a thing. And she'd open up one side and she would sell pencils and erasers and, little tiny knickknacks. You could buy candy. And everything was cheap. It was like, 25 cents, 50 cents, $1, whatnot. On Fridays, she would make popcorn and put them in the little tiny, the single sandwich size paper bags, staple them shut. And for $1, it was either like $1 or 50 cents. You could buy a bag of popcorn and you could smell it. And it was everyone's favorite thing. And that was, it's such a small thing when you think about it, but the fact that she had that kind of impact on all of our lives from, I knew of her and was in that orbit of her life from 98 through the beginning of 2001. And she retired in 2004. So 3 years later, and then 10 years later, she passed away. But it really inspired me to when I saw that documentary talking about that we confined law-abiding legal immigrants, U.S. citizens, because they looked like what we perceived as the enemy or the official enemy from the war. And it seems like so long ago, but it's not. She was born in 1930. She's the same age as two of my grandparents. My grandma was born, I think, 1930 or 1932 and died in 2016. She only passed away 5 years before her. Not all of us have this, struggle, but otherwise fine, happy white life. A lot of people have had struggles for their entire lives, and it's disheartening that we're still fighting the same battles over and over again. But I wanted to quickly tell you about Midori Koyama. Miss Koyama, as we knew her, the school book lady. I remember there was a big wood sign in the library. It said Miss Koyama's Book Garden. I remember thinking that was so cool to see that she meant something like that to the school. And I saw that when I went back and volunteered years later. And I was like, oh yeah, Miss Koyama, I remember her. And I've just never forgotten that story about what she shared, how her family just kind of had to abandon their heritage in California and flee persecution to Utah and be placed in a concentration camp in the United States of America. So we're repeating history again, and I think it's time to talk about what happened now 100 years ago and ensure that we don't repeat ourselves. So now you know the beautiful story of a wonderful human being named Midori Koyama. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody that our thoughts and prayers go out to her remembrance, her family, living relatives. I am very sorry that she ever had to have a persecution tale as part of her own life story. But she did beautiful things with it afterwards. And that's the real hope right there, folks. It sucks when you're oppressed. It sucks when people say you are the reason why whatever. But if you turn that hate and plant a flower, you can bring brightness to somebody else's lives for generations to come. And ultimately, you win. They don't. Hate never wins. Love does. Kindness matters.